Go. Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Kavanagh, City Councillor for Bay Ward, and I'm very happy to be with you this evening to talk about an open house here for the design for Richmond Road renewal. This is very exciting and it's long overdue, and I'm sure you're just as excited because that's why you're here, to hear about it. So I'm going to introduce Amir Zahabi, who's one of our engineers from the city, and he's going to introduce some of our people who are working on this. We've got Parsons, who's been put on contract to work on this project, and they're going to show you the presentation. Amir?
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to go over the design tonight. I'm Amir Zahabi. I'm the project manager from the city side, leading this functional design. I have here in our team, Chris.
Amir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the quality of your, I don't know if anybody else is not getting a good quality. We could barely hear you.
Oh, okay. Is it better now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. I just stepped back a little bit. Thanks, Connie. I'm just going to repeat myself. I'm Amir Zahabi. I'm the project manager from Transportation Planning on this project. We have here Chris Redden and Erin O'Higgins from Parsons from the consultant side, and Elizabeth Murphy, who is my program manager, and Megan Whitehead. She's a senior project manager from the Active Transportation Group. So we have, I guess, 2 decks of slides in both languages. I think Chris has covered that in the chat. For those of you who prefer the French version, you could simply go to view options and switch between the 2 decks of slides. And yeah, so thanks. And I'm just going to pass the mic to Chris to, we can get started, Councillor, if you're okay with that.
Please do. Thank you.
I can start us off. So hi, everyone, and welcome, as Amir said. And so the purpose of this online open house is to present the functional design for the project and to receive feedback from the public. So the key information that we'll present today includes the project scope and key considerations. We'll touch on plans for future cycling connectivity to the east and the west of the project limits. We'll present the functional design of the cycling facilities and sidewalk reconstruction on Richmond Road. And finally, we'll get into the project schedule and next steps. There will be a chance for feedback and questions. And you're also invited to send your comments and feedback by email to Amir once you've had a chance to review all of the information. So Amir spoke earlier, the city project manager, and his email is provided in this slide. There's additional information on the city website as well. So the project scope. The project scope includes the functional design for the resurfacing, cycling facilities, and sidewalk renewal on Richmond Road from Bayshore Drive to Pinecrest Road. The work is expected to be constructed in the 2022 to 2023 timeframe. The second part of the design work is a concept development for the cycling facilities along Richmond Road from Pinecrest Road to Carling Avenue, so just east of the functional design limits. As part of this project, we've had consultation meetings, including 2 technical advisory committee meetings, 2 public advisory committee meetings, 2 meetings with Councillor Kavanagh, and our public open house tonight. And the scope also includes a municipal class EA process. So here are the key considerations for the project and the evaluation criteria used in the design. So cycling and pedestrian safety are a top priority. And the project schedule was also a key consideration, since the study must be completed by February 2022 in order to maintain the design and construction timelines. The funding for the reconstruction is limited, so cost-effective options were favored, and choosing more expensive options could result in the deferral of some of the work. So, for example, buffered bike lanes were chosen in some areas where it was decided they were most needed, so that allowed the funding to be focused on areas where improvements are needed the most. Traffic flows were evaluated to determine if eliminating any lanes of traffic should be considered. We'll touch on that later. And minimizing the impact on trees and vegetation was prioritized wherever possible, and bus stop interactions were considered and accommodated in the design. Here is the evaluation criteria that was used throughout the design. So accessibility was considered pedestrian safety, pedestrian comfort, corridor land use character, trees and vegetation maintenance, cycling comfort, cycling connectivity and access, cycling protection at side streets, transit priority, bus transit service, emergency service vehicles, speed management, general traffic flow, hydro poles and existing services and utilities, as well as construction costs. As I mentioned before, a traffic study was completed, and it was determined that at the Granite Avenue and Richmond Road intersection, existing eastbound and westbound turn lanes, so turning from Richmond onto Granite, should be maintained, but that the removal of northbound and southbound left turn lanes, so from Granite onto Richmond, can be considered as the performance impacts would be insignificant. And at the Des Moines and Richmond Road intersection, a traffic study was completed, and it was determined that the existing configuration should be maintained. The desire for a reduction in the posted speed limit was expressed by multiple parties in the Public Advisory Committee meetings. The existing speed limit is 60 kilometers an hour, and the potential reduction to 50 kilometers an hour has been generally supported by those consulted, including technical stakeholders. So the functional design study will recommend that the potential speed reconstruction continue to be explored during the detailed design and into post-construction. Pre and post-construction speed data will help determine the appropriate posted speed limit in accordance with the city's speed zone policy. The desire for a pedestrian crossing between Granite and Pinecrest was heard at both the meetings with the councillor and at the Public Advisory Committee meetings. The funding for this project is specifically identified for the renewal of existing road and sidewalk surfaces and the addition of cycling infrastructure. But there is a separate city program that exists to add traffic signals, which prioritizes locations on a warrant basis. We explored this request further and determined that a pedestrian crossing, or a PXO, is not the safest or most suitable solution here due to the high vehicle volumes and speeds. And the pedestrian volumes at this location are currently too low to warrant a traffic signal pedestrian crossing, referred to as an intersection pedestrian signal or an IPS. However, updated pedestrian counts could be requested for next year to see if the pedestrian volumes have increased since the last count. So it's possible that pedestrian volumes may be higher as transit ridership goes up, so that may help the case going forward. And now I'm going to hand over control to Chris to present the functional design.
Thanks, Erin. So we have the functional design cut up into different pieces for the purposes of the display boards and the presentation. On the project website, we also have what we call a role plan. So one big PDF file that's continuous from end to end. So that's available as well if anyone wants to take a look after the presentation. So I'm not going to go through all the little details, but I'll try and give an overview of what's going on in each segment here. So this starts us at our west limit at Bayshore Drive. The intersection here on the left-hand side, that's the intersection of Richmond and Bayshore. You'll see that it's dashed. That's because it's not part of this project in specific, but we did want to show it for context because it's planned to be constructed around roughly the same timeframes. And we wanted to show how the two projects would tie together. So this one starts just to the right, just to the east of that intersection. So generally speaking, we have cycle track in each direction, east and west, on each side of the one cycle track on each side of the road, and we have 2-meter sidewalks on both sides of the road. There's also some transit stop improvements going on. As we get towards the right edge of the clip here towards Ridge Valley, you'll notice on the north side, so that's the westbound direction, the cycle track switches to buffered bike lanes right at the edge of the page, whereas on the south side, we're staying a cycle track. Next slide, please. So this next segment here as we move along to the east. So we're continuing cycle track on the south side. And the reason we picked that here is because we have this second lane ending. And that's an area that we felt it was really important to get that curb in there to prevent cars from trying to sneak past the end of the lane and use the buffered bike lane to try and get past and up ahead of other traffic. So we really wanted to keep that protection in there. And then as soon as that second lane is gone, then we go to buffered bike lane. In the westbound direction, we have buffered bike lane for this whole segment along here. As we get towards Du Maurier, the existing intersection configurations generally maintained with the crossing and the traffic signals for the pedestrian crossing. We are adding in the green thermal. We're showing that for the eastbound direction here because of the potential for conflicts with right turning vehicles. Next slide, please. So as we keep moving east here, this takes us past Lovett Road. This brings us to one of our more challenging sections. On the south side here, you'll see marked in red, this is a designated heritage property. So there's some pretty big restrictions on what we can and can't do. And that designation extends to the back of Sidewalk past the property line. So that really pinched us on the south side in terms of how much room that we have. The north side, we were also pinched as well by a series of mature trees that we didn't want to cut down. So this is probably one of the most challenging areas here. So we've squeezed the sidewalk down to 1.8 meters and we're squeezed down to a bike lane without a buffer as well, unfortunately, as we get past this pinch point. As we continue east past there, we develop the buffers again for the bike lane and the sidewalk widens back out to 2 meters once we're past the pinch point.
So excuse me, Chris. Some of the questions might be better to ask as you go, if that's okay,
Sure.
Just so people understand the presentation. Can you tell us what color is the cycling track?
So we didn't use shading on this plan so that we could see the aerial underneath, see the existing condition. So what you'll see the difference is we have pavement markings shown in orange and then physical changes are shown in black lines. So where you see the orange on one side, that's a bike lane with an orange painted, well, it's orange on the plan, it would be white pavement markings in the real world, but with a painted buffer. Whereas the best example would be near the top right of this clip. You'll see that the cycle tracks contained between two sets of black lines. So that's how you could tell where it would be cycle track. I see that there, sorry?
People are seeing the slides in French instead of English, and I think this is predominantly an English audience.
Okay, so up at the top, if you go to view options, you can pick between the two languages. So it'll say Aaron O'Higgins in English presentation or Chris Redd in présentation en française. You should be able to pick the English.
Okay. I don't know if I have that myself because I have an iPad.
So hopefully everyone's able to see that. We could look at, oh, I'm seeing a thank you.
Okay, great.
So sorry, I'll go back to some of these questions here. Are pinned curbs planned in the westbound zone to the east of Ridge Valley? So that's a comment that we did receive. Thank you, Paul. So that's something we're still looking at. So we haven't added those to the plan yet, but that's definitely something that we're considering. I see a question of, does buffered mean there's a curb? So when we say a buffered bike lane, we mean it's painted, but painted with space between it and the traffic lane. So instead of just having a single line, there's two lines. And then if it's wide enough, we try and put diagonal hatching in between. So it creates a little more separation for cars and cyclists. And it also gives the opportunity that if in the future there's an issue identified that you want to enhance the safety, there's room to put in pinned curbs or other measures. And how big is the typical buffer? So our minimum buffer is 0.3 meters. And then wherever we have space, we try and widen it out more than that. I think the widest spot that we have is 1.2.
Great.
So I think that's it for the questions or as we go.
Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you. So at the right edge here, we're starting to see the cycle track appear on the top side again, and that's on the approach to the Granite Intersection. Next slide, please. So at the Granite Intersection here, you'll see that we've come up to cycle tracks on both sides of the road. We have cross rides for protected movements for cyclists in the east and westbound directions. And this is an area that Aaron touched on earlier with respect to the traffic analysis that we did. And we found that we can get rid of those left turn lanes coming off of Brennan to Richmond Road without significant traffic impact. And what that lets us do is that lets us fit in bike lanes on the approaches to the intersection on Brennan. So that gives cyclists some designated operating space coming in. Cyclists coming in, they could continue straight on the bike lane if they want to keep going on Brennan. They could turn right into the cycle track if that's the direction they want to go. And there's also that bike box there to let them get ahead of cars stopped at the red light if they want to make a left turn to go the other way on the cycle track. So you can get those full movements coming out of Brennan. We also have upgraded accessibility for all of the pedestrian crossings through here as well. And you'll see the cycle track continues to the right edge of the clip. Next slide, please. So this takes us to the segment where we have a few more areas of buffered bike lane. You'll see some of the wider areas on the north side here. That's where there's a really wide shoulder today. So that gave us the width to work with to fit those in. Something else you'll see is we are going to cycle track at the bus stops. That's to meet current OC standards for interactions and to avoid a situation where the bus has to pull over really far into the buffered bike lane and cause problems with the interaction with traffic. Something else you'll see on this segment comes from our public advisory committee meetings where there was the concern identified with cars waiting to turn left, either off the top of this clip where there's those higher density residential high rises, or turning down into Mariel Court, where cars would use the painted shoulder that's there today to try and pass on the right. We heard that's quite dangerous already, and we definitely don't want a situation where people will be passing on the right using the bike lane. So we made sure to extend the cycle track and extend the curbs to block that pass on right movement to make sure that that dangerous movement doesn't happen. Next slide, please. So this takes us to our east limit as we approach Pinecrest Road. This is one of the areas that was pretty challenging. We found that we couldn't get rid of one of the eastbound lanes without having some pretty significant impacts on the operation of Pinecrest. And the other challenge here is we needed to come up with an interim tie-in that brings cyclists back to what we have today for now until further improvements can be made continuing to the east. In the eastbound direction here, as the second lane develops, we have the cyclists entering the second lane as it develops to give them priority, since they'll be the ones already in the lane that gives them right of way over cars trying to change lanes into their lane. We also have lots of sharrows, and there'll be good signage posted as well to help make motorists aware of the shared operating space. Coming the other direction, we have the cycle track entry carefully positioned so that cyclists don't have to merge into that single lane before they could exit into the cycle track. And of course, that'll be supplemented with good signage so that motorists know that they can't continue straight into where the cycle track is. So this is a good point to mention as well, that there's some other connecting projects both on the east and west sides. So we'll start on the west side, and then we'll come back to here on the east side. Next slide, please. So this is back to the west end of the project near Bayshore Drive. So you'll see a number of different connecting projects. In yellow, that's our project that we're talking about today. In red, those are the intersection modifications that I was mentioning at the start that were shown in the dashed lines. So that's something else that the city is aiming to do in a similar time frame so that they can be built to tie in together as we have shown. In the darker blue, that's a MUP connection, a multi-use path connection that would bring cyclists to Bayshore Shopping Center towards that LRT station. In lighter blue, there's a planned future connection over the 417 towards Holly Acres Drive. And then in green, there's the planned extension of the multi-use pathway to John Sutherland as part of the baseline median busway environmental assessment. Next slide, please. So this takes us back to that west end with that challenging tie-in there. So we know that this isn't somewhere where we want to stop. We do want to keep making these improvements, but the challenge being that you can only do so much in one project before you have to divide it and have another project coming in afterwards. So as Aaron mentioned at the start, we're also considering the conceptual design for this next segment that would pick up the cycle tracks where they're left off and carry them further to the east across Pinecrest Road and across Carling to tie into these bike lanes and cycle tracks that are present on Richmond Road today, east of Carling. So definitely recognize that there's a need for further improvement there. It's just a matter of implementing it one piece at a time as we go.
Excuse me, Caroline is asking if you can, when you have the drawings, can you explain where the sidewalk and bike lanes are? So like use a mouse to show the features.
So I'm thinking I'll pull up the roll plan when we get to the question period, and I think that would be a good time to show. Because I can't point at the English slides. I'm running the French ones.
Okay.
So I'll once we're done and we get to the question period, I'll pull up the roll plan and I can zoom in and show a little better what's going on.
Excellent. And then we'll read the rest of the questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So next slide, please, Aaron. So this takes us to the opportunities for engagement and next steps. So following this opportunity, we're looking forward to hearing your feedback both tonight over Zoom, and if you want to send an email with written comments into Amir Zahabi, we're asking if you could please send your comments to him by December 20th. After that, we're looking to wrap up this functional design assignment in early spring 2022, or sorry, early 2022 before the spring. After that, it'll move to detailed design. That'll be in spring 2022, and then continuing into 2023 when construction is going to start in spring 2023. So definitely any written comments after this, please send them over to Amir Zahabi and he'll pass them along to us and we'll make sure to take them into account. And thank you very much, and we'll move on to the question period.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. So I'll go back to the chat and we'll go back to questions that we haven't answered yet.
Aaron, if you're able to stop sharing your screen, I'll pull up the roll plan. And I think that'll avoid any confusion. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, how big does the buffer need to be for a pin curb? It would be best if we put pin curbs in wherever they fit.
So what we're going with for a minimum buffer is 30 centimeters. Each line is 10 centimeters wide, and we want to have enough of a gap between them that they do appear as two separate lines and not one continuous line. And that's also in line with the guidelines, the provincial guidelines for how wide a buffer should be. And 0.3 meters is enough that you can squeeze in a pinned curb. A pinned curb is usually 15 to 22 centimeters wide. So wherever there's a buffer, there is the possibility to put them in. The challenge with pinned curbs being that they're in the way for winter maintenance. They can't easily be removed every winter. It would be a pretty big and expensive operation for the city to undertake. And those pins that you put them in with are pretty heavy metal dowels. So you're left with not really a good option. If you pull them out of the asphalt, you very quickly turn the asphalt into Swiss cheese. So they do work where you really need them, but at the same time, they have to be used with moderation because of these maintenance challenges that they bring.
Thank you. Sarah's asking, can the vehicle lane be narrowed at all to allow for pin curves to give more space for the cycle portion?
So I'm happy to say that we're going with the narrowest lanes that we can while still supporting OC Transpo bus operation. The buses, and particularly the double-decker buses, are a relatively wide vehicle. So we need 3.5 meters. So I'll zoom in here. I'm sharing the roll plan now. So we're giving 3.5 meters for the travel lane throughout. And really that's a fundamental OC Transpo requirement. We also have to remember this is a truck route as well, and the trucks need that width. So this is really the narrowest we can go to, but this is a good demonstration here that we're really ratcheting this in versus what's painted today. It will be noticeably narrower. This is also a good example showing where we're trying to hit more than that 0.3 meters. We're trying to give a 2 meter bike lane and a 0.5 meter buffer wherever we have the space to make that work.
Great, thank you. Daniel's asking, since there is a bike box, will there be a no right on red?
So that's decided by the city traffic signal staff during detailed design. That said, it would be my expectation would be yes with a bike box.
Okay. And we already read about explanations for the descriptions. Could you also describe the regular traffic lane widths? The road plan shows lots of excess space that could be used to slow traffic and create more space for people on bikes to have a better buffer.
Yeah, so I did touch on us going down to the 3.5 meters. You'll see in some spots we do drop the painting of the buffer, and that's a painting detail just for how the city paints buffered bike lanes and bus stop interactions. So this single dashed line would be where a bus pulls in and out. So you'll see a little bit extra there, but not a ton, and that's just getting rid of the second line on the buffer. Other than that, we should be pretty consistently 3.5 meters throughout from end to end. There's certain areas like here where we're actually keeping the existing curbs and we're building in behind the existing curbs for cost efficiency reasons. So we have a little bit more, but not a ton more than the 3.5 meters. And that's somewhere that we do have room to fit in these facilities that we're aiming for.
Okay. By impact on the operation of Pinecrest, what mode do you mean? It sounds like you mean cars, but don't realize that there are others on this road.
So we try and balance all of these. We do a multimodal level of service, and that is an analysis that we did here. So yes, we do have to consider cars. They are one of the users, and we recognize, yes, we have pedestrians as well. We have cyclists as well. We also have to consider the transit users, the buses, as well as trucks that are delivering essential goods to businesses, food and stuff that we eat. So we look at all of these angles. And what we found is that getting rid of one of these lanes, which is what it would take to fit in the cycle track, would cause some pretty catastrophic results on traffic flows. And it's easy to say, okay, if it's just people, single passengers or single occupants in a vehicle driving to work that should be doing another mode, that's one thing. But then we also have to remember the buses that get stuck loaded with transit riders. We have to remember the trucks that get stuck loaded with these goods that we need. We have to remember the emergency vehicles that need to get people to hospitals or put out fires. So when we see results as bad as we were seeing here when we got rid of one of those lanes, it's not really an option just because of all those other effects that it has.
Okay, there's some comments about sharrows not being safe. Do you have some comment on that?
So they're definitely the last thing that we go to. They're not our preference. If it was possible just to build cycle track or bike lane end to end all at once, that would be much better. But we do have constraints. There's only so much that a contractor can build in a year. There's only so much funding available. So when we get to a situation like this, where we do have to end a facility, we're left with a scenario where we do have to find a way of safely merging cyclists into the road for those cyclists who do choose to operate on the road. And what we found is putting in these sharrows, having actual painted markings on the ground, combined with vertical signage communicating to drivers. It's really the best way to drive home the message to these drivers that there will be cyclists here and you should pay more attention. So we recognize they're definitely not first order, but they are a tool that we can use in these situations where it's necessary. And I guess the other thing to mention is that we do have the sidewalk right beside the cycle track. So those who are not comfortable riding in traffic can choose to dismount and walk. That's another choice until there's the chance to for the city to come in and complete the connection over to the other side of Carling.
Yeah. What is the timeline for redoing Richmond between Pinecrest and Carling?
So the work that we're...
Yeah, we know it's the most dangerous, yes.
Yeah. So the work that we're doing right now is to take a look and really frame up the problem of what needs to be done to these two major intersections to make it safe in between them. We are looking at the segment between them as well, but that turned out to be the more easier part than the two big intersections. And it's to be able to take a look at what it would look like and to assign a budget of how much this is going to cost. That's going to allow city staff to set this as a priority on their overall plans for cycling improvements throughout the city. So once we finish this work of drawing up the concept and coming up with a cost estimate, that's going to enable city staff to help plan this out of when this can come. So we understand it is a really important link, but until we're done that work, it's hard to say specifically when it'll come.
Okay, Is there any area where cycling and the sidewalk are reduced into a combined MUP along the stretch?
No, we're not proposing that anywhere along here. We considered it really early on in some of our options, but we found it really wasn't beneficial to hitting those evaluation criteria that we were looking at earlier.
I think you must be happy with that, Don. Thanks for the question. But are we maintaining 3.5 meters in multi-lane settings? Many projects do not feature 3.5 lanes in middle lanes and turn lanes.
So that's a good point. Most of the length of the improvement that we're looking at here, we're just doing a single lane in each direction. In the concept design where we're looking at the next segment, where it's beneficial, yeah, we are looking at cutting that down. So usually the second lane, we'd go 3.25 or 3.3. They're both pretty common numbers for that second lane to get that little bit of extra space to benefit the other modes.
Okay, Shandon saying she might have misunderstood. I thought it would be 2 lanes on both sides of Pinecrest. What is a sharrow?
So it is 2 lanes on both sides, but this is just in the segment that we're not touching as part of the functional design. As soon as we get into the section that we're working on and building these improvements, we're down to 1 lane in each direction. And to clarify, the sharrow would be this pavement marking that you can see here in orange. So it's one that gets painted usually in white paint on the asphalt, and it's an indicator to drivers that they should be sharing that lane with cyclists.
It is a last resort, and it's not one we want. In terms of making space for all road users, it seems like the lion's share of the space is going to cars, particularly the turn lanes. Is this really equitable, as you make it sound?
That is a challenging question. We're trying to reallocate the space where we can, moving away from the section that we're not touching yet because of those challenges and the need to defer that to the next stage of improvements. We are actually, if you go spatially, it's 50% or less is what we're giving to cars, which I think is a pretty big win versus a lot of the other roads that we're seeing.
Okay. Okay, I'm just seeing if there's any questions.
So there was one earlier I didn't get to of pointing out the bike lanes and the cycle track. So this is a good area. So the buffered bike lane would be this type of configuration here where we see these orange markings with the diagonal. So this would be a buffered bike lane with the paint markings. And then in here where we can see the black lines, this would be a cycle track that's separated by curb and then some buffer space in between, usually going to be concrete in this project.
I think Megan has something to add. So Connie, if you can unmute her, please. In terms of some of the questions.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in terms of sort of how all these pieces connect. So this project is largely coming forward because of the road renewal and sidewalk renewal that was happening. And so the cycling project wanted to go ahead at the same time, but we fully acknowledge that, you know, from High Street to the west, it's really a local cycling connection right now. And then as soon as that high piece to Carling can get done, it really becomes more of that crosstown network. So we appreciate that, you know, Sharrows beyond High Street is really to accommodate those few people that may be still using this corridor despite those conditions, but we appreciate that is not going to be attractive to most people. And I just wanted to note that sort of the active transportation plan is how we prioritize all our pedestrian and cycling kind of retrofit projects where we go in on our own to do them. And that consultation is happening right now on which projects we plan to do for the next couple terms of council. And so I'd encourage you all to go to the website and provide your feedback if you think, you know, those projects are very important. And that's really what the next sort of 3 to 6 months will be, is prioritizing which projects come ahead fastest. So it's a very important consultation that we're doing right now, and that will sort of influence which ones move ahead quicker. So that was kind of what I wanted to add, but if there were other things that you wanted me to weigh in on, I'm happy to
Sure.
have some more questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Sorry, you should introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, I'm a senior project manager in the active transportation planning group. So we do the pedestrian and cycling kind of retrofit projects where, you know, where there's an important missing link, but the road isn't getting dug up for by anyone else. And so we look for sort of those really important pieces that we want to do on our own. So and then we also do the, you know, the planning of what are those important links and how to make them happen.
Okay, I think you've kind of answered William's question about what's the city's understanding of the effectiveness of sharrows, but I don't know if you want to elaborate anymore.
Yeah, I mean, sharrows on an arterial road are really, you know, they're, you know, I think as Chris sort of said, they're a little bit better than nothing, but we appreciate that, you know, east of High Street, this really stops being a cycling facility that most people will use, and it really requires that next project to come forward soon to make this a meaningful sort of crosstown route that we want it to be. This is just, you know, part A of a two-part project that we really require to get all the way to Carling.
Thank you. Is the sidewalk a standard width, or does it vary like the cycle paths? What is the width?
So the width we use for the sidewalk wherever we can is 2 meters. There is a very limited segment where we have to squeeze down to 1.8, which is the minimum that the city's using right now.
And there's sidewalk all the way along, correct?
Yep, both sides from end to end, concrete sidewalk.
Okay. Is there any other options for sidewalks to make crossing distance shorter? I noticed that all the sidewalk curves to make turning easier for vehicles, and that makes crossing distance longer.
So I think this comment must be in reference to the protected intersection here. And there's a couple of factors that go into that. We're not widening out these any more than they are today. And we did some checks as much as we could to see if these could be made any tighter. And unfortunately, they can't, while still allowing those vehicle movements that we need to make sure are possible. Because the last thing we want is to tighten these up too much and then have a vulnerable user, have a pedestrian or a cyclist waiting, and then have a truck that needs to get in, track over the sidewalk and hit them. So that's something we don't want. We want to make sure there's room for the vehicles to operate. But we are pushing back the cross ride. We call that the bend out, and it has to do with right turning vehicles and making sure that those right turning vehicles get a good line of sight to the cyclists who are crossing. Part of that as well, and it governs more for this crosswalk than the other one, is making sure that for those with visual impairments, that it's a relatively perpendicular crossing. So obviously there's no single right point, but we don't like putting them where it's a 45-degree angle coming off the curb.
Kathy is asking what is marked there for a tree removal?
So up here, there are a few trees that are in conflict with what we're showing. So one of the things we're going to be flagging for during detailed design is speaking to forestry and having a closer look on which trees specifically need to be removed, which ones can be saved with special measures during construction. And then the other component of that as well is whenever there's tree removal, there's tree compensation. So we'd also be talking to city forestry about the best species and locations to be planting compensation trees. What we've heard with our early conversations with forestry is that they're looking to plant more towards the west end where there aren't a lot today. And we do have some good opportunities to put some new trees in there.
Thank you. Nicholas is asking, will there be post bollards used as part of the buffered lanes?
So that's one of the comments that we're hearing. It's not something that we're saying yes or no to right now. It'll need to be considered more during detailed design. It's also one of the things that can be added after implementation if there's problem areas where it's found that motorists are doing undesirable things. There's something that could be added in. And they're one of those things that has to be done with moderation just because of the maintenance cost that goes into removing them every year in the winter and reinstalling them in the spring, as well as the damage of when they do get clipped by vehicles. So they are a good tool, but they need to be used in moderation.
Can we get a closer look at the drawings?
Yes, they're posted online. When I'm done sharing my screen, I'll paste it links in chat one more time for everyone's convenience. It's also ottawa.ca/Richmond Design is the short link.
And we'll put that in our newsletter, so it will be a hot link to all this information. So along with the recording, we post them together. Thank you. Can flashing lights be used at the beginning of sharrows to alert drivers?
That's an interesting one. That's something that we could put in for consideration come detailed design. A yellow flashing light is sometimes used on a warning sign to draw the attention of motorists. The share the lane sign is a warning sign, so I don't see an incompatibility with that, but I also can't think of any examples of where it's used. So it's something we'd have to consider further.
Okay. Could you right now put the total cost of what this road renewal will be?
So we're still working on pulling together the cost estimate. So I don't have an answer for that one right now. We're also splitting it into a couple components. As Megan mentioned, this is part of a road renewal project. So we're going to make sure that we're properly allocating the costs between the road renewal budget and the active transportation improvement budget.
Couldn't we take the turn lane out to preserve the trees?
So we did take a look at these turn lanes, and what we found was, even though it's not needed for those who are turning left, the problem is people who are turning left jam up the through traffic. And even though it's only one lane in each direction, there's some pretty high traffic volumes coming through here. And as soon as that one person's waiting to turn left and stops traffic, very quickly backs up and gets out of hand and starts having those negative effects on transit, on emergency vehicles.
Okay, Daniel's asking for Richmond westbound east of Pinecrest. Can we turn the north lane into a turn lane with paint and then close the right turn east of Pinecrest to High Street for active transportation? It is a small turn lane and should be able to be closed.
So is this, I believe this is the area. I was trying to catch exactly where he was saying. So this is something that we are looking at as part of the next steps. There's definitely an opportunity here to do something really good. But crossing through a signalized intersection adds a bunch of challenges. So it's not the most straightforward to just add on to the one end of this project. But in the long term, that's definitely something we're looking at.
Thank you. Donna's asking, at the protected intersection, it looks like pedestrians, i.e. visually impaired, must cross bike lanes to cross Richmond Road. Is this what is happening? This could be a hazard for people with disabilities.
So people who want to cross Richmond Road are going to need to cross the cycle tracks. So what we're making sure is that we're following the latest protected intersection guidelines. These include considerations for those with visual impairments. So you'll see some elements that we have here. We have the Twizzies, the tactile walking surface indicators. Another thing that's going to be added in with new intersections, I don't believe any have been constructed yet, but they're part of the new guideline, is these directional bars that'll help those with visual impairments both locate where the crosswalk is and find the direction of the crosswalk. And then we'll have these, the white markings, the high tonal contrast, which will help those with limited sight.
Thank you. Kate's asking about getting from Bayshore to these cycle lanes. She tries to get from Holly Acres to Des Maurier. So
as part of this project, we're not touching the Bayshore Drive intersection, but as you can see, there is a design here that's contemplated, and this is something that I believe the city is looking to implement at a similar time frame. So that'll help with this intersection. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, there's some future projects that will come in and help make other connections. So here we can see the start of a multi-use pathway that's going to cross under Richmond as part of the stage 2. So that'll connect to the Bayshore Shopping Center towards the transit station, as well as a future planned connection over Highway 417 towards Holly Acres. So not immediately, but definitely in the city's plans to do.
Thanks. Can there be posted reminder signs for cyclists that pedestrians have priority where paths cross?
So those do get installed at specific places in protected intersections. So that's, yeah, that is a key element. And there's a big yield to pedestrian sign with a bike and a yield and a pedestrian stencil. So that is an important one to give that reminder.
Thanks, Don, for that. Daniel's asking, what about cyclists going west? There is no option to continue west along Richmond.
So cyclists going west under this concept here, at this intersection, they would cross to the south side. And then this is where they would transition to a multi-use pathway to continue further west. So on the south side of the road, it's a bidirectional facility.
Yeah, maybe I can add. So MTO is talking about replacing the bridge over the 417 in the next several years. They're sort of at their design stage. So we are sort of getting engaged in that and trying to work out sort of what an interim cycling connection is, as well as possibly the long term. The long term concept was to have a multi-use pathway on that southeast side and a sidewalk on the northwest. But with some of the ramps that they haven't yet modified, there may be an alternative sort of interim condition. So we're aware of that desire, and I think something will come forward as part of that project or in close relationship with that project, but not as part of this one. So we are working on it, but I can't tell you right now what that solution looks like, only that we're going to look at the intersection and look at how to get across the highway and try to come up with something.
Thanks, Megan. I don't know if I've missed any questions. Does anybody have any further questions? Okay. Paul Clark, eastbound and Granite, you need something to prevent cars entering the cycle track, thinking it is a right turn channel. Experience from Donald Street at Saint Laurent. So bollards and more. What else could you do?
Chris, do you want me to answer that, or?
Sure, yeah, that'd be a good one.
I can speak to sort of some of the experience with that one. So there's a number of design treatments that will probably come through in the detailed design in terms of how we develop that cycle track. And so it'll probably be done on a very straight stretch in advance of the intersection. And then there's various signage and other things. But I think the challenge that happened at Donald and Saint Laurent was largely that we had turn channels, and then the cycle track was sort of developed right where those turn channels used to be. So the guidance that we're working on right now is probably we'll just extend that curb back in the intersection a little bit more than what's shown here, just to help with that development. And so it won't just be this sort of cycle track that peels off from the corner there.
Thank you, Megan. It's great to have your experience here, Paul, on comparing on other parts of the city. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. Anything else? Any further questions? If you think of something later, we can send them. So, you know, if you have this thought right after, that's okay. We can forward them. How much education is built into the plan? I guess that means for everyone, cyclists, and for, of course, drivers, cars.
So that would be something I think will be ironed out closer to implementation if there's any specific education campaigns that need to be done. Generally, these are pretty consistent with other facilities that have been put into the city, but there's definitely, that's something that would be looked at closer to implementation time. Is there anything you can add, Megan?
Yeah, just that we do have programs that do that specifically for sort of new cycling facilities, or where there's sort of communities that maybe not be familiar with the new concept. So we would work that out at detailed design, but certainly, you know, anywhere there's something that the designers feel should be highlighted, you know, we can put out some signage. We can have people out there answering questions and sort of respond as we get comments back too. So
Okay. Shandon's asking, how can we slow down the traffic? We did mention that the speed limit would be reduced, and I support that from 60 to 50. I think that would be somewhat helpful, but what other measures?
So it's always a challenge to apply speed management to an arterial road. A lot of the things that we do on lower order roads don't really work as well on these big, busier roads, speed humps, chicanes, that type of thing. But what we are applying here that we feel is going to make a noticeable difference is really dialing in the feeling of width. Today, there's pretty wide lanes, and then there's that urban shoulder. And then off to the side of that, there's the asphalt sidewalk that kind of visually blends in. And as drivers, it just feels like a lot of wide asphalt. So by bringing these curbs in as close as we can to the traveled lane and really increasing that feeling of narrowness for drivers, that perception makes a really big difference and should really help to encourage slower operating speeds.
Thank you very much. And it'll certainly give it more of a scale of walkability as well, because you don't feel like walking there right now. As you say, the sidewalks are asphalt, and they frankly look like shoulders on the road. So it'll have a total different feel to it. Daniel's asking, also, are the slip lanes going to be removed at Bayshore and Richmond? Cross the south slip lane often, and cars do not see you because of vegetation. When they do see you, they are going too fast to stop for you or don't want to.
So that is one of the things that we will look at. So the concept that's shown dashed here was developed a couple of years ago. And so certainly I think one of the things to revisit is particularly the southeast and northeast corners and whether those channels are needed. I looked up the volumes last week and they're actually remarkably low for that sort of design. So we will look at it. I don't know, sometimes geometry dictates those, but we can certainly look to do things to improve that yield condition. Sometimes we raise crossings and things like that to remind drivers that they need to yield. But I guess I will say that it still is under MTO's jurisdiction, so it will also be subject to their feelings about that. But we're going to evaluate it and see what design we can come up with that we think better serves pedestrians and bikes, and then we'll bring it forward and try to get it reviewed by MTO, and also it'll be shared with the public, so you can provide comments on it at that time.
Thank you. Will buses still obstruct the traffic lane when they are stopped at the bus stop?
Generally speaking, yes. The idea of bus bays is something that's been phased out because they really cause a hit on transit performance. So as the city's trying to improve transit performance and transit ridership, one of those measures is keeping those buses in the traffic lane. So yes, they will.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? I really do hope MTO cooperates on these projects. We've got a few of these bridges in different areas of Bayward that we'd like to see some bike or multi-use paths added to make them safe. And this is a key one. We've also looked at Moody, and I don't want to bring those into the conversation, but just to give the example that we're hoping to have those. What are the MTO's limits? Well, they're in charge of the bridges because it's about highways. But you want to elaborate, Chris or Megan?
I'd have to check the property ownership. Sorry, Megan, maybe you know more.
Yeah, you can see the property in Geo Ottawa if anyone wants to see the specifics, but essentially in this location, it goes to just the east side of that Bayshore intersection. We own, generally the lanes on Bayshore approaching the intersection, but sort of everywhere inside the existing crosswalks is all of their land, as well as the ramp obviously coming up. So.
Okay. Bob is asking, why is this section not being made into 4 lanes for car traffic on both ends? The road is 4 lanes. Does this not create a hazard for drivers?
So the section that's one lane in each direction today, what we found is there's no big performance issues that would really drive the need to widen it to 4 lanes. Du Maurier is a good example where the flow today is okay, the through flow. We're not seeing any big issues. Granite is another one where as long as we keep these left turn lanes in place so that those left turners don't jam up the through traffic's actually flowing pretty well. We're not seeing any performance issues that would warrant creating that much extra asphalt.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're trying to go the other way, trying to give more for cyclists and pedestrians. So, so not for cars. Hopefully everyone's going to take the transit. Yeah. So yes, at certain times of the day, you're going to get traffic because it's people coming in from Bell's Corners, and that's the route they take. We know that. However, if you make it easier, they will come. The more lanes you put in, the more cars there will be. So you don't really gain. Is there a date for baseline BRT project construction?
Not to my knowledge. I think it's subject to funding. So I'm sure we'll also be part of the transportation master plan update that's ongoing. I think the transit projects though are going to be sort of going to public consultation, I think closer to 2023 or 2024, closer to the end of the timeline. But I don't know if anyone else has any more information.
Okay. Isn't buses stopped on Ontario Road with a speed limit of 50 or 60 dangerous? Well, 50 is a default speed on any road in Ottawa, but I'll let Megan and Chris elaborate.
So 50 or 60 is generally where we would see that and where that configuration would be seen, and we don't usually see any issues. We always make sure that there's proper sight distance everywhere on the road, whether it's a stopped bus or a pedestrian that fell over from the sidewalk or a branch that fell down. You always need to be able to see to stop. So we make sure that there's that good visibility for a stopped object. It's only the higher speeds, 80 kilometers an hour is usually where those concerns start to come in, and we start really taking a close look at what the best option is.
Thank you. Will be much of an improvement. Okay, there's just comments about the sharrows, and I'm not crazy about sharrows myself. That is something I have concerned about, and what do I have to do to get more funding to fix that, Chris? Is that the holdup?
Megan had the best answer to that, which is the AT plan is under coordination right now. So people who want this extended sooner should go to that consultation and comment accordingly. Yes.
Can you put the link on for that? Connie may be able to do it if you haven't got it there yourself.
I can add it to the chat.
Yeah, thank you. That's the active transportation links. We need to add those things. So there. So that's it there. We'll have it in our newsletter as well. This is where you show your support for better connectivity for active transportation. So please go nuts and tell us what is important to you. That'd be great. It's very helpful. Okay, we're going to wrap up. So I think that was a very productive meeting, and I thank everyone for their questions. It was very helpful. It's good to understand it thoroughly. All questions are very valuable, so that you understand what this is about and what it means for you and what your cycling experience will be. So I appreciate it very much that you came out, and bit by bit we're going to improve things. I can't stand it when we do a piece and then it ends. That drives me crazy. You want it to keep going. But with your support and pushing on these things, it really does help. And we will eventually have everything connected so that you can have nice, smooth rides where you feel safe. So thank you very much for coming out. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Amir and Aaron and the whole team. Really appreciate it. Can you just go over very quickly next steps?
So the next steps, we're going to hear everyone's comments who wants to send them in writing. We're looking forward to getting those. Following that, in early 2022, we're going to be wrapping up this study. So making tweaks to the design, and then we have some reporting to do as well. After that, in the spring, it goes to what we call detailed design. So they take this kind of overall plan of what it should look like, and then figure out all the specifics of how exactly it should be constructed, all the little details. That'll turn into a construction contract, which will be ready to go out to tender, and then construction will hopefully start. The plan is spring 2023.
Okay, yes, we're very much looking forward to it. I've been hearing about this for a long time. Okay, well, thank you. And please send in your comments. The links were there, and we'll also put them in our newsletter along with this recording. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the evening. Take care.